Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And if you're new to this format, joining us on YouTube or whatever, then the way that we do this is sort of broken into three parts. We do the news of the week within the world of solar. Then I look at what webinars are coming up, what conferences within solar that are in the next few weeks or the next month or so. And then we go into a deep dive on a topic that I find of interest. This week, we're going to be talking about what's new in battery or energy storage system technologies for 2026. And the format here also has us joined live by a number of people online from all over the world. And so hopefully we'll get a conversation going there. And I'll tell the folks who are online, you're probably muted, so unmute if you jump in. And also put your video on if you can. That's always nicer than just a black screen with your name. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into what's happening in the world of solar for the week of, let's see, what is this, February 10th? February 8th, I think, is the date that Sunday. Anyway, despite the culture war narrative, it appears that conservative voters overwhelmingly support the use of solar energy. Conservative renewal advocacy group Energy Right recently surveyed 861 voters who identified themselves as conservative on the topic of energy affordability and solutions to stabilize pricing, including solar PV. In nearly every survey category, 50% of the respondents or greater indicated that they would support solar development, especially if it benefited local agriculture or the economy or the energy infrastructure or energy pricing. Of those, 58% said they supported increased solar development, 25% said they oppose it, 17% were unsure or had no opinion. This tracks with results from a similar poll conducted by First Solar, which is the largest solar manufacturer of panels in the United States, where they polled 800 Republicans, Republican-leaning independents, and self-identified Trump voters. A slight majority of these voters, 51% surveyed, said they were in favor of utility solar energy, with 30% opposing it and 19% having no real position on it. Survey participants were asked about solar development as it related to tax generation locally, how it could be implemented on agricultural land, the ability to curb the cost of electricity. And basically, 62% of these respondents said the government should in no way interfere with a landowner's right to develop solar if they wanted to. When asked their preference about nearby land development, and this is one of those statistics people point to a lot where they say most people don't want solar located near their home. Well, in this case, the survey did come in and said 47% said they approved or were fine with large solar systems being developed near their land, which sounds like it's a minority. But when you compare that with, would you be okay with a housing development being located near you? That was only 14% who were in favor of that. How about a nuclear reactor? That was 8%. How would you like natural gas to be developed nearby? That was 5%. And would you like to see an industrial park near your home? And that was down to about 4%. So, solar does pretty well when you look at it from that perspective. Now, according to the 2025 Long-Term Reliability Assessment Report that was released on January 29th, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, the electric grid is going to be facing some serious reliability risks over the next decade, as the growth in load demand is going to be overwhelming the amount of generation out there. The annual reliability assessment serves as a snapshot of grid adequacies over the coming decade. The survey projects that summer peak demand would surge 224 gigawatts. Now, that's 69% more than was predicted a year ago. Winter demand would surge even higher at 245 gigawatts, which is a 65% increase. And according to NERC, compound annual growth rates for summer and winter peak demands are the highest ever projected since tracking began in 1995. And I guess I just want to point out that basically what they're saying is 65, 69%. They're saying, okay, this year our estimates of growth are that much higher than they were last year. So kind of calls into question how good these projections are when this is a 10-year projection and 1 year later you're revising it by 70%. That's so I think what we're finding is these guys are always under projecting what they think that the load growth is going to be. Artificial intelligence, data centers, digital economy account for most of the projected load growth, but the report also identifies electrification of large industrial facilities, electrified transportation, that's EVs, crypto mining, heat pump deployment, and other demographic trends as primary demand drivers. According to NERC's capacity and energy risk assessment, 13 of the 23 assessment areas will face resource adequacy challenges over the next 5 years. By 2030, 5 regions are considered high risk. These include Mid-Continental Independent Operator, or MISO. You can see that right there in the Midwest up around Minnesota, that area. Then PJM, which really goes all the way from Chicago to New York City. That all of these in red here are the high risk. Texas, ERCOT is at high risk, and the Western Electric Coordinating Council's Basin and Northwest subregions. So those are up in the Pacific Northwest. So everything there in red, high risk. Everything in orange is elevated risk, and then the rest are, I guess, got things under control. All right, the game of solar whack-a-mole continues as the U.S. Department of Commerce is nearing the end of its investigation on solar panels from India, Indonesia, and Laos. So, give you a little perspective here. Solar panels from China first faced significant U.S. tariffs in 2012 when the Obama administration imposed anti-dumping and countervailing duties that averaged about 31 to 36%. Then the Chinese manufacturers basically said, all right, let's move our production to Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. So in 2025, the Commerce Department found that panels from those countries were really being manufactured in those countries to avoid the Chinese tariffs. So they were violating the same anti-dumping provisions. So they imposed tariffs on those panels. So allegedly, China manufacturers moved their production to India, Indonesia, and Laos. So that's the game. In 2024, the U.S. imported approximately 56% of all panels installed nationwide. The vast majority of these came from Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Cambodia. And in related news, the U.S. has just announced a trade agreement just this week with India, and they're saying they're going to be reducing their tariffs there to 18% from what was as high as 50%. But I couldn't find anywhere whether this is going to affect all of these countervailing tariffs that they're looking at imposing on solar panels. So it might, but then again, it might not. A new bill filed in the Missouri Senate on January 7th seeks to suspend all solar project construction throughout the state until the beginning of 2028. Now, this was introduced and sponsored by Senator Cindy O'Laughlin, a Republican serving rural northeastern Missouri and is currently serving as the state body president pro tem. The bill would halt all construction of all solar projects throughout the state, as well as put a hold on issuing any new permits for any solar projects at all. So this is kind of a new development where the state of Missouri is basically saying, not only we don't like solar, but you're not allowed to install it for at least 2 years, which obviously would destroy the industry there within that state. And yeah, Pete, you have a question?
Yeah, are they denying off-grid systems as well? Are they just totally outlawing solar panels in Missouri? Is that the goal?
I think their goal is to posture, but my guess is, I mean, how are you going to stop that? You know, it's like, yeah, I'm sitting on my porch with my shotgun. You're not taking my panels, So if you're off grid, they probably don't care. And they probably don't care to stop it anyway. I think it's all just performative kabuki theater. and
I,
somebody will come in and give them some money. So,
I read the law. I read the law, and there's no point where it doesn't specifically say utility scale. It says all solar projects.
yeah. Yeah. And the governor, I know you're in Kansas, but the governor is in support of this. So they've got a brand new governor. So I'm not quite sure. Maybe this will come to pass. I just don't know. This is dumber things have happened, but clearly it sort of feeds into that whole. I always love the quote that's attributed to Gandhi, where he says, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you, and then you win. This is clearly attack phase. They're pushing back. So. And these are from
Kansas,
the guys who stand up and down and go, we shouldn't let government pick winners or losers, but by God, we're in charge, so we're picking winners and losers.
Kansas has not a similar bill, but something that is going along the same lines as being proposed.
Yeah. And do you
It's
think
going
it's
through
got any?
Kansas. It's going through Kansas Farm Bureau.
Oh, I wonder, does it have any traction, you think?
Who knows? It's a Republican supermajority.
Yeah. Well, and that's the funny thing is this really shouldn't be a red state, blue state kind of issue. If anything, you would think that those people who are super conservative would be in favor of let's generate our own energy. Let's not be dependent upon fossil fuel industry. So obviously the narrative is hijacked. And as I said in the first item here, conservatives really do support solar. So it's the politicians. And when folks say, how can solar be avoid this? I mean, the bottom line is you need to just pay off some politicians. You need to just be giving money away. I mean, that's what the fossil fuel industry is doing, and that's why we've got this legislation. So who knows? And it may be nothing more than that, is to say, we're getting money from the fossil fuel industry. We'd like to be getting some money from the solar industry as well. So gin up, man, ante up. If you want to play poker, you got to ante. So it's it's sort of that thing I remember back years and years ago where Microsoft was being like taken to task for monopolistic because of their operating system or whatever, and all of a sudden Bill Gates starts giving out millions of dollars in political contributions, and nobody, hey, problem solved, not a problem. So, as Lily Tomlin said, no matter how cynical I get, it's never enough. So, all right. Enphase Energy announced that they plan to start manufacturing their IQ bidirectional EV charging platform in volume by the fourth quarter of 2026 after a series of successful product demonstrations. Let's hope this isn't one of those Lucy pulling the ball away from Charlie Brown, when he goes to kick it, because they've announced this. I remember they announced 2023, they announced 2024, they announced 2025. This feels like it's a little closer, like it's a little more real. So the Enphase charger connects to the direct current port of an EV charging the vehicle, but is also capable of using the EV's battery for home energy backup during grid outages. The bidirectional charger has been tested in the US and Europe on US and European EVs. The system is engineered to work with residential and light commercial single-phase and three-phase energy systems. It follows the various standards like UL 1741, IEEE 1547, and open communication standards such as ISO 15118-20 to support vehicle interoperability and standards-based vehicle-to-home and vehicle-to-grid functionality with various compatible vehicles. So this one feels like we're really, I know in my prediction thing at the end of the year last year, I said, I think this is going to be the year we see true residential bidirectional EV charging. So it's feeling like we're moving that way, like it's really going to happen. So that's good news for us. So that's all the news that I have for this week. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that mix at all? Things that have come across or things that you think are important to share with the group?
Just a quick thought about the bidirectional. I'm curious if Tesla will support I'm curious if they will ever support bidirectional. I know that they want obviously the Tesla Powerwalls to be used for their energy storage. Um, I know they've spoken about the implications of bidirectional charging on the battery warranty, so that could get messy.
Yeah, my guess is a lot of these companies are going to jump into this, but they're going to jump in with proprietary solutions. So if Tesla wants to jump into the residential or light commercial bidirectional charging, my guess is they'll come out with a name brand Tesla unit that they have approved, just like Enphase is proprietary. You know, it works with the Enphase system. We'll probably see more and more of that. We saw that with the Ford Lightning, where they had a bidirectional charging thing, but it was only through Ford and it was only for that specific vehicle. And then somebody's going to clean everybody's clock by having something generic, you know, that and cheap. It'll be Chinese, no doubt.
Yeah, of course, with Tesla having the grand market share of the EV industry, that would be the one to get. But if Tesla is unwilling to cooperate with any other, like Enphase, for instance, if Tesla won't work with Enphase, Enphase is a very popular solar inverter brand, of course, very, very popular. They have a lot of market share. So it'll be interesting to see the battle between the two.
Yeah, and I know. I really think your thought about Enphase is right on, because here in our office we have an Enphase system. If I buy a bidirectional, it'll be Enphase.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what my vehicle is, as long as they've told me it's compatible. And even if they tell me, well, it's kind of sort of compatible, I'll probably still use it, because I'm not going to tell Toyota, you know, I'll just plug the bloody thing in and hope it works. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Eric, you had a comment? Go ahead, Eric. Your hand was up. Okay. All
I
right.
have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
There's probably not one yet, but is there a cost comparison? If I was going to buy batteries or an EV, would there be a cost comparison between, do I necessarily need batteries if I have a high powered EV?
Yeah.
Because that's an extra 5 to 10 grand for maybe a 10K system of batteries, where there's already about 10 grand in a vehicle of batteries.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And I've got that in the last section of this presentation. You anticipated one of my questions when we talk about what's new in batteries. So,
sweet.
So I'll put you off for just a little bit, and
that's
we'll
no
address
problem.
that.
Appreciate it.
All right, Eric, I see you're back up there with your hand raised.
Yeah, I was having problems unmuting for some reason.
Okay.
I saw an interesting article. I don't know if you saw it, and I came late. Maybe you talked about it, but I'll forward it to you. I'll put it in the chat. It said China sold 11 million electric vehicles in 1 year, leaving less room for oil it used to buy from Venezuela. It was really interesting talking about how that they're, advancing their infrastructure so much using solar and batteries and renewable energy that their needs for oil are actually going down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. Clearly. Now, China, of course, has tremendous energy needs, but they've taken this sort of all of the above approach. They are far and away the greatest adopter of solar, far and away the greatest adopter of wind, far and away the greatest adopter of coal, nuclear, so they're and all of the above. So they're really investing in their infrastructure. Probably something that we should be doing. Clearly, the U.S. has not invested in our infrastructure to any great extent. So we're going to be sort of left behind in that. When you look at how many EVs are purchased, it's far and away, China. And so they are moving to an electrification of transportation. And I really feel like that's going to happen worldwide. And really, it's going to be a matter of simple economics. The electric vehicles can be produced at a very low cost compared to the internal combustion engine. So, essentially, it's a battery on wheels with a computer, a couple of motors turning the wheels. So there's a lot less moving parts, a lot less maintenance. The electricity is cheaper than gasoline. All of these advantages. You can right now buy a BYD EV that's 80% of the value or more of a Tesla that's costing you $80,000, but the BYD you can get for what, 25,000? So and they do have low end models that are as low as $8,000. So if a consumer can buy an electric vehicle for $10,000, they don't care if it's made in India or Indonesia or China. So the only reason America doesn't have access to BYD is because of protectionist policies by the federal government. But because we've managed to tick off our neighbor to the north, Canada's going to be getting BYDs. And I saw a thing where I can go across the border and buy myself a BYD and drive it back. And there appears to be no prohibition of that. So boy, how is that going to affect Detroit, the Detroit automobile industry, when the average cost of an internal combustion engine vehicle is above $50,000, but the average cost of an EV comes down to $25,000-$30,000, and they're better and they're cheaper and they're nicer. Yeah, this is one of those watershed moments where everybody wants to protect rotary telephones, and it's just not going to happen. So
Can I make one more comment about the rapid charging? I recently went to Germany, and I remember growing up watching batteries evolve and everything, and factories started looking at hydrogen because it would take 8 hours to charge a battery. Man, they got these rapid chargers that it's just as fast, like 15 minutes. You could pay, and man, it was amazing.
Yeah, the BYD has a rapid charger, and I know we've touched on this in previous episodes. So if you're looking at this and you want to go back and look at battery charging and the like in EVs, but the way that lithium-ion batteries charge, and that's the vast majority of what we're dealing with here, it's constant current, constant voltage. So basically what happens is the first 80% of charge can happen super fast. And then the last 20% takes a long, long time. So you can now go into a fast charging station and in 5 or 10 minutes, get an 80% charge on your vehicle. The last 20%, yeah, that's going to take you hours, but who cares? So, so if you want to stop, get a cup of coffee, charge your vehicle for 10 minutes, and now you've got 250 miles of range. Well, that's the same as if you just stopped and filled it up with gasoline. So yeah, that problem, range anxiety, is going away. These batteries are now 300 mile, 350 mile, things like that. So that part of it's going away. The cost prohibition, that's going away. There's still an issue with cold weather versus warm weather operations. That's still a factor. We've got to deal with that. But if you're living down there where Devon End is in Trinidad, you don't care about the cold weather. So you're just going to drive an EV, So you got nowhere to drive. It's an island, but what the heck? You don't care about range anxiety either. All right. So any other questions before we jump into the news of the week here? Or sorry, the upcoming webinars? Just check there. All right, so let's go ahead and see what's happening in webinars. We've got a conference here that's going on at the moment, Energy Independence in Washington, D.C. So if you're not there, you're probably going to miss it. And today at 1 o'clock, so right after this, is the Reliability Blind Spot in Solar and Storage. That's a webinar at 1 p.m. today. February 18th and 19th, Intersolar in San Diego. Face-to-face conference is going to be happening. I know IREC is doing a Workforce Alliance webinar on February 18th at 2 p.m. These are more like work groups. I've participated in these before. So if you're a solar installer or somebody of that nature, you might want to help with this. They're asking about what's the employment trends. They're kind of putting together their reports. So this is a way you can have input into that. Resilience hubs, designing resilience hubs. Basically, they're standalone microgrids, February 19th. community solar chat from Solar United Neighbors. This is the 24th at 2 p.m. All of these are Eastern time, and you can look them up. I'm just making you aware of it. But community solar, if you're not familiar, that's when you buy into a portion of a larger install if your home's not suitable for solar. And it's a big deal in many states. EV charging developments, that's something we're just touching on. In fact, I registered for this just to find out what's happening there, February 25th at noon. And then our shameless plug for solarpvtraining.com, where we have we have ongoing online programs plus face-to-face programs. So you can check that out there. So those are the events that came across my desk. And if anybody doesn't have one to add, let's go ahead and jump into the what's new in solar batteries. And to give you a sense of this, the way that I organized this was looking at batteries in general, utility scale batteries as well as residential batteries. But then at the end of it, we'll sort of hone down a little bit into the residential world. But I just wanted to hit what are sort of the major trends people are looking at out there for battery technology. And for those of you who are certified either through ETA for solar, or if you're certified for fiber optics or technician, these have been qualified for half an hour of continuing education. So, and you can get a certificate of completion at solarpvtraining.com if you need that for your records. All right, so battery technology, I think hopefully if you're into this, like most of us who are online at the moment, yeah, we know it's growing, and it's growing pretty dramatically, pretty quickly, 16.5% compound annual growth rate, and they're anticipating that's going to continue on for the next decade. So, excuse me. So if you're wanting to invest in something, I mean, battery technology, this is the way to go. I like to tell people that, we're in the floppy disk age of solar. All of this technology is moving forward. If you compare it to desktop computing, we're just in the early phases of solar technology. The industry's only 13, 14, 15 years old as a true industry. We're in the, I don't know, punch card age of batteries. I mean, we're not even to floppy disk. It's at its very, very beginning, and it's going to change. It's going to change dramatically, and we're already seeing it change dramatically. I was kind of curious as to, within this industry, we're seeing this dramatic growth. So where is this growth taking place? Is it taking place at the utility scale, like we see with solar installation, where utility scale dominates, residential, commercial? So this pie chart pretty much shows in 2024, 2/3 of everything installed from the storage market was residential. So this is the dominant. It's still small battery systems being installed at the residential. Utility is a quarter of it. We're starting to see large utility scale systems being installed, and it's a big deal, but it's still a minority of the marketplace. And commercial, I know when I go out there and do solar assessments at commercial systems, they usually, if they had the backup requirement, they already have diesel generators or something like that already installed. So maybe that's why they're a little less motivated to go and invest in batteries at this early stage, because they already have, some sort of generator backup if they've determined that they need it. All right, so what are the predicted trends that are happening? So one of the things I looked at was a report that just was released by Wood Mackenzie, the 5 trends for global energy storage. And one of these trends is a restructuring of the global supply chain. I'll go into a little bit more depth on these, but just give you the overview at this point. And for those of you guys who are here live, if you've got any questions or anything to add, again, feel free to jump in. That just makes everything better. 2026 is the year where grid forming becomes regulated, becomes a thing. And we'll touch on what do we mean by grid forming, because this is kind of a big deal. Non-lithium technologies are going to be emerging at scale. I know in some of our previous discussions, everybody likes to talk about what about this option, what about this technology. I think we've all agreed that lithium is a bridge technology. It's taking us from lead acid to whatever is going to be next. The question is, how long is that bridge? You know, is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? You know, obviously something's going to be next, but lithium's proven to be pretty entrenched at the moment. So we'll see. Storage will be deployed to support large loads. I'll explain more about that, but spoiler alert, this is data centers, right? Data centers want their own storage. Hybrid systems, the popularity that we've seen in the United States is going to extend worldwide. So this is back to residential, where we're now seeing about 50% of all of the systems installed have some sort of battery backup. Maybe that's a testimony to how bad the American grid is, but that's gonna start going worldwide. So those are the 5 trends that Wood Mackenzie identified. So let's talk a little bit about what these things mean specifically. The global supply chain, well, we know China is dominant. And the Trump administration has instituted this concept of foreign entity of concern. And for larger installations, in order to qualify for all of the different incentives that are out there, which are kind of going away, you better make sure that you don't have any components in there that come from China, that come from Russia, that come from North Korea, or come from Iran. I think those are the countries that have been identified. Well, when we look at batteries, well, 70% coming from China. So if all of a sudden you're wanting to install batteries at scale here in the US and the major supplier of this product is forbidden, essentially, or becoming too expensive, well, that causes supply chain issues. So that's kind of the main thing. China is dominant. There have been these incentives to build out the manufacturing capacity here in the United States of batteries. The Trump Great Big Beautiful Bill thing, which of course I find it annoying that every bill that ever passes has nothing to do with whatever it is. You know, they name it something that has no meaning. Anyway, that the budget reconciliation that trashed the Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation either. So anyway, it did away with those incentives. It didn't touch the incentives for batteries, right? Battery incentives are still in place. So it went after solar. So anyway, so hopefully we'll see more manufacturing of batteries within the US, but the components that are being used in batteries are still coming from China. So if you're talking about lithium, if you're talking about cells, if you're talking about all of these things, the primary source is still going to be China. So that may lead us towards other technologies for sure.
Do you want me to go ahead and do a timesheet then for Christina?
I'll put you on mute there. All right. So, okay. So that's one issue is we're going to be dealing with supply chain issues. How are you going to have this 17% annualized growth if the source of all of your product is being, cut off through federal policies? The second trend, grid forming inverters are becoming mandatory. So what do we mean by grid forming? When you create a distributed energy system, all of the power that you generate has to synchronize with the grid. Otherwise, if you're feeding power out there onto the grid and it's different in voltage, different in frequency than the power that already is on the grid, then you're going to cause harmonic distortion. You're going to cause fluctuations in frequencies. You're going to cause problems. So your system has to be in harmony with the grid as it exists. Well, large turbines on the grid provide a certain amount of frequency and voltage stability, because even if there's a brief interruption or whatever, these things still spin. The inertia is going to keep that frequency and that voltage stable. So our distributed systems, generally, when they connect to the grid, they draw from the grid what is the frequency, what is the voltage, and then match that. So they're grid following items, technologies. They're not grid forming. They can only produce what the grid is already producing. So that's kind of how we've left. So as I said, distributed energy systems have always relied on the grid to establish their voltage and their frequency. Grid forming inverters can do this independently. At the residential level, I'd say the very first grid forming inverter that I saw was, I think, the IQ8. That's one where it can create its own grid. And what they're saying is, they call it sunshine backup, but basically it's saying, hey, I can operate whether the grid's connected or not. And if everything goes down, even without batteries, I can just start up. I don't need a power source to get me started. I can form my own grid. I can form the own frequency, my own voltage, and we're all set to go. So now these grid forming inverters can operate. Now the downside has always been that they're more expensive, but the cost difference between grid forming and grid following is tightening up. So that cost discrepancy is going away. And so what they're saying is that these will likely become mandatory. In order to look at grid stability here, they might come out with and perhaps, who knows, UL 1741, which deals with inverters, might say, okay, all new inverters have to be grid forming. That's going to be something that will allow for the introduction of battery technologies, microgrids, all of these kind of things. So this is a movement, and we'll probably see this happening in 2026.
Jay, may I ask you a question?
Sure, you may.
So in industrial settings where there is dirty power coming from the grid, and that often happens in second and third world countries, a voltage regulator is online, which uses some energy from the grid, but produces consistent voltage and hertz for use at a site. What you're talking about now is to have a voltage regulator that works in reverse, and at the same time has to have another level of sophistication in that it's going to read the voltage from the grid before it feeds the grid. And then it's going to clean up the power and feed back to the grid. Now, I can understand where the application of computerized systems can make this efficient and not so expensive. At the same time, we have to admit to ourselves that energy coming from the grid, even in the United States, is not clean and it's not consistent. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, you may be delving into areas that I'm not as proficient as I should be, but you point out that the UL 1741 SA and SB tried to address some of those issues with grid inefficiencies and the like, where they mandated that the inverters allow for flow through a bit. So if you have a brownout, they can deal with a wider voltage range. They can deal with wider voltage tolerances. They can deal with startups so that they don't pull the grid down, so everything's not timed. It's based on when the grid is available. That's one aspect of part of the problem, but it's not addressing the thing of dirty power. It's still addressing, how do you ride through some of the dirty power issues at your local place. What this is getting towards is, I think, more. I'm not quite sure how independent systems can clean up the grid. You can make little adjustments, but the grid is a big thing, you know. So that's technology I don't understand. I think this is more operating as an island when the grid is down, or assisting the grid in a black start kind of situation, because when the grid goes down, one of the issues is you need to have something for the grid to reform around. You know, that's why they often have battery systems in substations and the like. So maybe what they're going to be looking at is drawing on this combined power for black start. I'm just speculating, and I might be 1,000% wrong on it, but I think this kind of points out why we're in the less than floppy disk age of batteries, because all of these are big issues. I know from my own perception is the large load people are more concerned about how do I operate independently of a grid that I can no longer trust. So that's something that they're looking at, is not so much how can I help clean up the grid, but how can I work without it when it's simply not available. And that's something where you would need grid forming inverters in order to do that. So maybe that's what they're trying to address first, but I don't know how we fix the grid like you're suggesting. I don't think I'm being any help. Yeah, Al, do you have perspective on that?
Yes, commenting on Dennis's comments on the grid is dirty. I don't quite understand that comment, because here in Texas, which is the only market that I'm familiar with, the grid puts out certain power defined by voltage and frequency. There's a frequency deviation that is allowed and still be considered within the legal range. And if that frequency deviates too much from the standard, inverters, modern day inverters, will disconnect. Say this is not. Otherwise, the inverter will, when in the export mode, will put out voltage and frequency that the grid operates under. So I don't understand why having a dirty, I don't know how you define dirty, but how having a dirty grid would affect an implementation of this. And I'm speaking now of residential solar, not the utility solar, and distributed energy networks.
Okay, so Dennis, maybe you can. I know you're in Hungary, right? So could you give an example of something there?
Well, it's not as much Hungary per se, but it is not uncommon in much of the world where grid power is inconsistent, both in terms of its availability and in terms of its consistency, primarily with voltage. But backfeeding to the grid, in my opinion, the difficulty there is matching in Europe and most of the world 50 hertz. In the United States, it's matching 60 hertz. That's a more difficult thing to do if the grid demands that kind of matching when you're feeding the grid.
Yeah, I think what we're dealing with there is when we say dirty power, basically the grid is designed to operate within ranges. You know, we'll talk about, like in a residential, 240 volts, 60 hertz, but it's not 240 volts and it's not 60 hertz. It's plus or minus 6% or so for the voltage, and plus or minus, what is it, like 3% for hertz or whatever. And if it goes outside of those tolerances, typically, as Al pointed out, either our systems will shut down or the grid itself will shut down. It'll black out. But variations within that range on a regular basis can wear down your equipment. It can cause your stuff to degrade. So industry especially put on cleaners. So they basically say, I know I'm getting this variant. It's within a tolerance range, but it's messing with my stuff. It's cheaper for me to put something on to clean it up and feed my equipment. So
and that cleaner is typically a transformer that simply uses some energy to take in X factors with regard to the electrical power and spit out X factor the same that is, however, consistent. And this, what your concern about having to backfeed the grid based upon very tight specifics or specifications coming from the utility, I think that's going to be a way that the utility is, or another way that the utility is going to be able to control what small producers are able to do.
Yeah, and it's been one of the arguments from utilities for a while. They say, listen, as long as we control all inputs and all outputs, we can control the quality of the grid. Well, they haven't done a great job of it, but that's their argument. And they're saying if we're getting power being fed into us from various distributed energy sources, that's going to mess with the quality of our power that's outside of our control. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but traditionally now our systems, when they operate as designed, dirty power coming in, we're going to send dirty power out. And the question I think that you were raising earlier is, can these technologies be made to help clean up the grid, from a distributed standpoint, as opposed to just sending them the crap that they're sending us? We can clean it up internally for our own use, and we've been doing that for a long period. But when you start feeding back to the grid, how does this all affect?
And our colleague from Texas is absolutely correct. I would just add that the whatever good or dirty power the utility is providing, it gets cleaned up primarily at that transformer that's on the post down the street.
Yeah. Or using capacitors in some, within your building. Yeah. Pete, you had a comment, and then we'll jump forward.
Yeah, another version of dirty power is that there's a tolerance on the sine wave. It's called total harmonic distortion, because the load, which the utility cannot control, is affected by the company down the road with spot welders and other intermittent loads. So they do the best they can to deliver us a smooth sine wave, but dirty power also is corruption of that sine wave, which they do what they can. I mean, even cool things like sculpting the faces of the generator poles, etc. But there's load variation that also causes corruption. And I think maybe what the grid formers in inverters are doing is reading that corruption and then adding in the power at the appropriate moment. It'd be quite a trick to pull off, but if they could do that, that would really be helpful to the grid.
Yep. So I think this discussion just points out the complexities that are going to be involved in this. And we're just getting started on this. We'll jump into the non-lithium just to give you a sense of it. Where are rechargeable batteries, the market at the moment? How do those play into effect here? Well, lithium is about 43% of the market at the moment for rechargeable batteries. And lead acid's still about a quarter of all the batteries that are out there. And then what are the nickel metal hydride? I think that's what that is 20%. And those are primarily electronics. So we're talking not just solar, we're talking batteries in general. But lithium is far and away the major use. So what are some of these on the horizon technologies? Well, I get emails from folks all the time wanting to tout sodium ion batteries, sodium being sort of the latest flavor of the month. How is that going to work? Well, sodium batteries, they are for sure a thing. They're compatible with existing lithium ion manufacturing techniques. And if we just sort of put sodium versus lithium, The energy density is not as good. That's sort of the downside of it. Lithium, you still get more power per pound, essentially. So that's one reason cell phones or EVs may want to stick with lithium, at least for the time being. They will operate longer, sodium will, so that's an advantage for sure. The voltage, a little bit less. Temperature range, a little bit better or same. And energy, let's see, I've got that covered up there, that last one. Safety, yeah. Lithium tends to have the issue of thermal runaway. Sodium does not. So one reason why they're looking at sodium as a possible thing is if China becomes a supply chain obstacle, maybe somebody moves in and produces sodium batteries that are going to meet the needs affordably and sort of bypass that roadblock there. Flow batteries, another technology that we hear a lot about. One of the advantages of flow batteries is kind of their scalability. And these are essentially, the batteries can be as big or as small as you need to make them. It's just what electrolyte, how much electrolyte, the anode and the cathode that you put in. You can have these things the size of municipal water tanks, or you can have them much smaller. So that's one of the advantages. They can have 100% depth of discharge, which is nice. Obviously, you can use all the power that's contained. They cycle like forever. They're non-flammable. The limitation is they're expensive, for sure. But if you're looking at battery backup storage for a data center or a city, maybe flow batteries is going to be your option. Iron air batteries, this is another one you hear a lot about, where it's cost effective. Iron is abundant, although who knows, we seem to be having critical, they're environmentally friendly, long duration storage, enhanced safety, but they're lower energy, they're heavier, they're larger, and slower response time. So it's another technology. I haven't heard so much about iron, but this is another one that's solid state versus liquid. This is a big deal, and I think we'll start to see this where everything is solid, and this gets into fast charging, for instance. You can have higher energy density, they're safer, they're not going to have thermal runaway. You can get super ultra fast, so I could see this being the next step up in EV technologies. If you can charge these things super fast, they're lightweight, they're safe, they're reliable. So I think you're going to start, but I think this is still a lithium technology. So it's just that they're moving from a liquid to a solid. Then we talk about deploying batteries in large data centers, and this is a big deal. Interconnection is an issue here, and one of the dumb things that, again, we're talking about United States here. If you've got a data center and you say, okay, I'm going to have a huge load demand. I'm going to build this data center. It's the size of Manhattan. It's going to have a huge load demand. But in order to meet that load demand, I'm going to put in my own solar array. I'm going to put in my own battery system. And those things, when it comes to interconnection evaluation and permitting, are considered two separate events. So they evaluate it based on load demand. It goes through that whole process. Then they evaluate it based on generation, and you go through a whole nother process, and they never quite get it in their brain that these things are offsetting each other. So you go through a 5 or a 6 or a 7 year process, which is just not gonna work. So if you're Google or you're Microsoft and you've got a data center you want to bring up online in 2 years, let's say, a good option would be standalone. If you don't have to go through 7 years of interconnection hearings and processes and expense. If you just say, I'm not going to connect to the grid, well, that's going to require huge battery backup. So this is one of those issues that they're talking about. And plus, the other thing is that if you're Google or if you're Microsoft, you may have set out some clean power goals, and this is going to meet nicely with that, so that's something that they're thinking in 2026 we're going to begin to see. And then hybrid, as I mentioned earlier, where you have, and this is at the residential level primarily, but already we're seeing about 40% of the systems in the US are incorporating batteries during the initial installation. And about 70% of the people say, I would like to incorporate batteries if I could afford it. So battery affordability is kind of the only thing from keeping us from really going super majority on these. And this is going to extend worldwide. So when we talk about why somebody puts batteries on their home, I think we can all intuitively figure out this, but the primary one is resiliency. The grid is simply not dependable, so I need emergency backup. Another one is solar self-consumption. This is a lesser reason, but basically this is where when I net meter, the utility is only given me, say, 4 cents and I'm buying power back at 20 cents. So why would I sell it to them for cheap and then buy back expensive? Why don't I just use my own power? So instead of sending it to the grid, like in a net metering, let's just store it in a battery and use it later. So that's self-consumption. The other energy arbitrage, we're starting to see virtual power plants where I can actually get paid money for having storage that is accessible by the grid during peak load demand periods. Fully off grid, another one. So there are reasons if you've got time of day pricing, that's another reason where you use your battery when electricity is expensive. You store it in the battery when electricity is cheap. So some of those are options where the grid reliability is not a factor. Well, this is one of those things that is going to be a trend in 2026 is consumption-only battery systems. So if you're a solar installer, this is something to consider. The big selling point is the grid's not reliable. This is going to be available, battery backup, blah, 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 blah. But when you do that, you've got to have some sort of automatic transfer device built into your system to disconnect from the grid. So you're not feeding back to the grid when the grid goes down. Well, if you didn't care, if you're fine with not having power when the grid goes down, you're going to save a lot of money. So this is the concept between consumption-only battery systems. So what they're really saying is, okay, if we're going to go consumption only, the configuration has got to have backup loads, and then you've got to disconnect from the grid, and you go into standalone mode when the grid goes down and you're operating just those backed up loads. Under a non-backup battery system, the grid goes down, you just have no power, right? You're just not backing up when the grid goes down. But you have all the other advantages of having a battery. So you don't have grid backup, but you can use these things for, self-consumption, right? You can use it if you've got time of day pricing to minimize the cost of your electricity. So there are a lot of reasons why you might want battery, but you're going to save a ton of money by not having to go into having an automatic transfer device. All you're doing now is just adding a battery to your inverter. Yeah, downside there, no grid backup. But if you're in a situation where you have really bad utility policies around net metering or time of day pricing or things like that, or in an industrial situation where you want to moderate demand charges by using your battery to power your big loads so you don't get spikes in load demand, which increase the cost of your electricity. But if your grid is pretty dependable, well, then maybe, you don't worry about the grid going down. At our farm, we had a very dependable grid. I think we only had power outages maybe 2 or 3 times over 2 or 3 years. So yeah, battery backup was not very valuable to us, but these other things may. So we're going to see this happening more and more and more. And so what are the top selling residential systems out there? I'm jumping through these fairly quickly. We're getting to the end, but this is the systems that are selling best. Tesla, the #1 battery system in the United States. Enphase, #2. So between those two, you're up at around 85%. Then number 3, Franklin. The reason I circled these is these are all AC coupled systems. Basically, they include an inverter within the battery bank itself, within the energy storage system. And we had some discussions earlier about which one was going to win out. Is it going to be AC coupled or DC coupled battery backup? And it looks to me like AC coupled is winning out. And the advantage in that is that basically the power coming out of the battery system is just good old standard AC. So if you're talking about charging an EV or running appliances, it's just kind of an extension cord. So the use of it doesn't require, like with an EV, special conversion equipment within the vehicle. You're just getting straight AC power. So it looks to me like the marketplace is saying AC coupled systems are what are winning out. And then this one, I don't trust these numbers because I'll say it says Enphase is the most expensive and basically Tesla is the cheapest. But when I started comparing prices, I didn't get that. If you look at the Tesla Powerwall 3, average cost around 13.5 kilowatt hours is around $10,000. It's an AC coupled system, 13 kilowatt hours. So around $10,000, a little bit more when you start adding in hardware installation, but let's not worry about those. I'll jump through that quick. But when we look at Enphase, 10 kilowatt system, about $8,500. So I don't see a huge difference there in cost. And I don't think there's going to be that much difference in installation. If you've got an Enphase system, you're going to use an Enphase battery bank. That's the issue there. So, and then they can be cheaper. But this now, the new system works with the new Enphase Generation 4. But this gets to the point that was raised earlier, is what's the difference between me buying a bidirectional EV charger versus buying one of these battery packs? And in fact, in my house, I was talking to my wife about this, and we were basically saying, you know what, I think because we've got an EV, I think I would go with the bidirectional charger versus adding another battery. So they're projecting the cost of these chargers at between $4,000 and $10,000, or $4,000 and $6,000. That's pretty pricey. But if you look at the battery, 10 grand, 8 grand installation, all of that. So yeah, my guess is it's going to be a little bit cheaper, but I guess the question is, what's the capacity of your EV? If you've got a big old battery in your EV, maybe that makes a lot of sense, but who knows? This is brand new technology. I'm certainly not going to buy bidirectional charger 1.0. I'm going to wait for this thing, for everybody else to be upset about it before they fix the problems. So, and then Franklin, this is another one. It looks like it's a little bit cheaper than the Tesla, but this is sort of third, and you can just see the capacity there. What it is, 15-year versus 10-year. So just in summary here, because we're right at the end here, we're really looking at residential innovation. We're looking at AI energy management. We're seeing this integrated into a lot of the systems. Consumption-only batteries, that's going to be a thing in some situations. Maybe new chemistries. Maybe we'll move away from lithium ion and start evolving towards sodium ion or solid state. Who knows? We're going to see faster charging, longer lifespan. We're already seeing some of that stuff. And they're starting to say, because some of these, and this is probably not on the residential level, but maybe, is third-party ownership. Basically, I don't know, I hate to say rent to own, but, part of the problem is they're expensive. So they're going to come up with some ways of trying to make this affordable upfront and more expensive over the life of the system. That's their game. And Taylor just added, be very cautious about Solar Edge. I kind of just left that off because I agree. they're having their problems. So anyway, that takes us to the end. I apologize for running just a little bit over, but I appreciate your attention, and we'll join again next week. Same time, same place. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.